All right, so today is February 14th. Happy Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's Day.
Happy Hanukkah.
It's Valentine's Day today. All right, so we're on our last session in this Luke Quarterly that covered Luke 1 through 9. Page 118, chapter 9, verses 18 through 27. And as I mentioned a minute ago, this is a really good passage. And Pastor Richard has talked about this. I heard him, I think in the last week, he may have mentioned this one. And I think I may have heard him. It's a great question that we will get to here in just a second. It's not going to take long. But I'm going to read the introductory paragraph on page 118. The title of the lesson is called Unashamed, and ashamed is mentioned in this lesson. Okay? And when I think of ashamed means, for most of us, it means embarrassed. I don't want to be ashamed, so maybe it's of something that I've done or that I've said, or you can be, again, kind of embarrassed. It's sort of how most people think of it. It has a little bit different meaning when Jesus uses it in this passage that we'll talk to when we get to it. But the opening paragraph, it says, first of all, the title is Unashamed. The subtitle says, Jesus expects his followers to forsake all else for him. And that's sort of the key of where he's talking about in this lesson. There's two parts of the passage today. So the introduction says, some people prefer to follow Jesus from a distance. Like Nicodemus, they would rather come to him in the middle of the night with no one watching. And that was a story of Nicodemus coming to him and saying, what do I need to do to be saved? And Jesus explained it to him. And Nicodemus was a religious man, but he came to Jesus to ask that question. But anyway, so that was one example. Like Nicodemus, they would rather come to him in the middle of the night with no one watching. They may want to fit in with a specific group, so they keep silent. They may be worried about the ramifications of publicly declaring their faith in Jesus, wondering what family, friends, or coworkers might say. Jesus' death on the cross was a public event, and he calls his followers to live a public life for him. And when I read that, a lot of the times when I read the introductions in the study guide, they're pertinent or relevant. This one, when I read it, it reminded me of me and when I was your age. Okay, and so I want to spend just a minute on this. Nicodemus, again, was a religious man. Jesus explained to him what it meant, what it took to be saved. But for us, and I believe it or not, I do remember when I was a long, long time ago when I was your age. I grew up in this church. You all know that. And so when I read this part about people may want to fit in with a specific group, so they keep silent. I think about when I was growing up in at middle school, rugby at West. A lot of my friends went to church here, but some of my friends went to church other places or didn't go to church. It seemed like all my friends kind of went to church. But even with that, when we were in church, we were in Sunday school and in church, we kind of talked about church things. But when we were out, for me, when I was out in school, it wasn't necessarily that. It was always something else. It was in sports, it was at the clubs we were in at school, or just doing things, working or whatever. And so part of it was it just didn't kind of come up in our normal course of conversation or whatever. The other part of it was there was an element of wanting to fit in. And this is where you can get in trouble as a Christian, okay, of being so conscious of wanting to fit in and not having someone say, oh, you're one of those weird, Bible thumper Jesus people, or however people could characterize it. And hopefully, people wouldn't do that. But just because we want to avoid possibly of having that, I guess there's no other way to say it, but we hide our Christianity or our belief or our faith, right? We can tend to do that. So I just want to encourage you, not that you have to go out there and grab everybody that you see by the shirt and say, I'm a Christian. Do you know Jesus? Do you believe? But hopefully you never shy away from, if the opportunity comes up in some way, to let people know that you're a little bit different, as a Christian. Okay. And then even to today, it's not just kids, because the next sentence in that introduction, it says they may be worried about the ramifications of publicly declaring their faith in Jesus, wondering what family, friends, or coworkers might say. And in this day and time, We talked a few weeks ago about cancel culture and how people are vicious. If they don't like what you say, what you believe, what you think, they will do everything they can to cancel you. Okay, social media is a good example of that. But it's not just kids, coworkers. When it mentions that, and I work for a place that has a very diverse, they say, workplace, and you have to be careful about what you say to certain people because people can get offended. And then again, um, if they pursue it, they can bring a lot of unwanted attention on you. Now, we'll talk a little bit about some ways to get your message out there without necessarily being sort of in your face in a few minutes. Okay, so that with that introduction, now let's look at the lesson for today on page 119. It kind of gives an overview of Luke chapter 9. There's 62 verses in that chapter. It's a very long one. But it says Jesus was ready to give his followers, and this is his disciples primarily at the beginning of this, some on-the-job training in ministry. So since they would be the ones carrying his message to the world after he went back to the Father, they needed to be prepared. So at the beginning of the chapter, he sends them out into the surrounding villages, says, but not without a warning. And he tells them, when you go out, you don't need to take anything with you. I will provide everything that you need. Okay. Says he got the attention of some powerful people, including King Herod. And King Herod knew who John the Baptist was because he had him executed. He had him beheaded for something that John the Baptist had said regarding Herod's wife. And when he heard about Jesus, he thought, I wonder if this is John the Baptist resurrected or reincarnated. And he eventually did get to meet Jesus during Jesus' trial before he was crucified. All right. So where we are now is after the disciples had gone out into the villages, Jesus says after their ministry in the villages, he took his disciples away to a quiet location for rest and retreat, but the crowds followed them. Once he saw the crowd's desperate need, he began teaching them. He also used a small boy's lunch to feed a large crowd, which numbered at least 5,000 men. So you remember the first incident of the fish and the loaves and the fishes. 5 loaves and 2 fish. He fed 5,000 men, and the crowd obviously included women and maybe some kids too. So that's a big deal. And it wasn't long after that. People don't really remember or hear about the second miracle of loaves and fishes, but he also did that again. He fed 4,000 more men a second time, with the women and children too. Now, it says, finally, after some time alone, Jesus instructed his followers about what it truly meant to be his disciples. And that's where we're going to be today. So the verses are Luke chapter 9, verses 18 through 27. So let me just read that, and then we'll kind of talk through those. All right, so starting in Luke 9:18, this is King James. You can follow along on the board, or if you have a different Bible that you want to follow along with, you can. It says, and it came to pass, as he was alone praying. So it starts out, Jesus was praying alone. And then after that, his disciples were with him. And we'll come back to him praying alone in a moment. But it says, and it came to pass, as he was alone praying, his disciples were with him. And he asked them, saying, whom say the people that I am? They answering, so this is his disciples, they answering said, John the Baptist. But some say Elias, and others say that one of the old prophets is risen again. He said unto them, but whom say ye that I am? Peter answering said, the Christ of God. And he straitly charged them and commanded them to tell no man that thing, saying, the Son of Man must suffer many things, and be rejected of the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be slain, and be raised the third day. And he said to them all, if any man will come after me, let him deny himself, and take up his cross daily, and follow me. For whosoever will save his life shall lose it. Whosoever will lose his life for my sake, the same shall save it. For what is a man advantage if he gain the whole world and lose himself or be cast away? For whosoever shall be ashamed of me and of my words, of him shall the Son of Man be ashamed when he shall come home in his own glory and in his Father's and of the holy angels. But I tell you of a truth, there be some standing here which shall not taste of death till they see the kingdom of God. So there's the verses, and again, there's 2 separate parts in this that we'll cover here as we go through it. All right, so you've seen the introduction. of how they got to where they were. He had sent the disciples out to the villages, telling them, don't take an extra pair of shoes, don't take any money, don't take any food, because I'll provide for you. And they learned that that was right. And Jesus gave them powers. They were able to heal people. They were able to teach. And that's what they did. All right, so let's see here. The first thing, I'm on page 120 now as we get into the first couple of verses, 18 through 20. So we talked about Jesus had been spending time praying in private. That's the first part of verse 18. It came to pass as he was alone praying. And the significance of this, it says, Luke noted that Jesus had been spending time praying in private. Luke often showed Jesus in prayer prior to key decisions or major events. And that's something that we can all carry with us. There's the first lesson for carrying with us today. That if something big is coming up in your life, that I would say that it should be hopefully a normal thing to pray about. Okay, small things, big things, to just take a moment to pray. And I find myself, depending on what's going on in my life, praying throughout the day, even if it's just wow, thank you, Lord, for letting me see the sunshine. When it's been kind of dreary again for the last several days. Supposed to be raining for the next few days. Just little things, those God sightings, right? What a beautiful day. Thank you for that. For the miracle of a, beautiful little girl that was born 2 weeks ago, healthy. Charles' brother was telling us last night about someone, I think in his church, who's the grandparent of someone who had a baby boy that was within a day or two of our granddaughter being born. And that baby, when he was being born, because he was so big, the last thing born, actually, he breached? Okay, so because he was so big, this young lady started having her baby, and because he was so big, she had a hard time, him passing through the birth canal. And so when it's time for a baby to be born, that's God's way of saying it's time, because obviously when you're in the womb, you're not breathing air and oxygen, right? I mean, your oxygen is provided through the umbilical cord, through the mother, right? That's what that is. It's providing food, nutrition, oxygen. Because it took so long for this baby to be born, there were some issues of a lack of oxygen, okay? And so this baby, he came out, and now they don't know if he's going to develop normally because of that lack of oxygen during the birth. So again, to compare and contrast, and it's not to say that they know for certain. So there's a lot of prayers going up for this little boy, but this kind of can go to the how. On the one hand, Chloe is born with no problems, perfect, healthy, and this little boy, because of this issue, it could affect him negatively for his whole life. So again, the things that you see, first of all, be thankful for the things that you have and that you see. Pray often. I said, one of the verses in the Bible, it is pray without ceasing, and I would encourage you to do that. Little things, small things. It's not just before you go to bed or maybe when you get up in the morning. Anytime. But Jesus prayed in private. That was the point of this. He also prayed publicly when he needed to. But so I would encourage you to pray as well. All right, so let's see. So after he was finished praying, his disciple, he was alone praying, and then his disciples were with him, and he asked them. So Jesus has been in his ministry long enough now to where he wants to know. And of course, Jesus knew what the people knew about him, or what they thought about him, or what they said about him, but he wanted to get the disciples' opinion. So he asked them, hey, you guys are around these multitudes. Who do they say that I am? And so you can see they answered. Some of them, they said, some people think you're John the Baptist. And this kind of goes with what we were talking about with Herod. Herod wasn't sure if he was John the Baptist resurrected or reincarnated. I guess resurrected would be the right word. And in the study guide, it says, some in the crowds, this is on page 120 in the middle of the page, some in the crowds believed Jesus was John the Baptist, though Luke pointed out that Herod had already executed John by this time. Still, Jesus' powerful preaching had convinced many that John had been raised from the dead and returned to his ministry through Jesus. Now, John the Baptist was a powerful preacher, right? Out in the wilderness, the loincloth that he wore, he ate wild honey and locusts. So He was a powerful preacher. When people saw Jesus preaching a powerful message, maybe that was easy for them to think that John had been resurrected. The next one they said was, others say that he was Elias or Elijah. Okay, now what unique thing about Elijah could have maybe made people think that Jesus maybe was him? What was unique about Elijah? That was unique with one other person in the Bible named Enoch. Anybody know? Remember? Okay, I'll give you a hint on Enoch. Enoch was, he was back in the days, he was one of Noah's ancestors, right? Most of those guys lived 6, 7, 8, 900 years. Enoch lived about 350 years. And then he was out walking with God one day, and then Enoch was not on the earth anymore, right? Like the pastor likes to say, he visualizes Enoch walking with God, and God saying, "Hey, Enoch, it's time to go home, and we're closer to mine than yours. So why don't you just come with me?" Enoch did not die, right? Elijah, how did he go? Flaming chariot came down and took him straight on up. Okay, so Elijah had not died. So perhaps when people hear Jesus this message, and he was knowledgeable about the Bible or about the scriptures, not the Bible, there was no Bible then. He was knowledgeable about the scriptures, powerful message. So maybe it was natural for people to say, maybe this is Elijah come back, because Elijah never died. All right, so that could explain the Elias or Elijah part. And then finally it says others say that maybe he's one of the old prophets that has risen again. And the study guide says, Pastor Richard has talked about this many times as well. Between the Old Testament and the New Testament in the Bible, timeline-wise, it's about 400 years. So for that 400 years approximately, apparently God had not been speaking to his people through prophets, which is how he used to do it, through visions, dreams, or prophets, or however God would speak to his people. For about 400 years, he hadn't spoken to people, which that would be, especially for people that were used to somebody, prophets, religious people, bringing God's message. Because, of course, there were still the Pharisees, the scribes, the Sadducees, but apparently they had gone far enough away from God's message that the people just weren't getting anything out of it, okay? So it says in the study guide, after 400 years of prophetic silence, the people may have believed that Jesus was a prophet for their generation. Now, the study guide says, while Jesus certainly was a prophet, Jesus was a prophet, right? He was able to tell the future, and he did. One of the passages in Matthew is when they said, how will we know that the end times are near? Jesus told them, here are the things that you're going to see that will tell you that the end is coming, all right? So it says he was certainly a prophet, but this designation did not fully describe his identity or mission. He was a prophet, but he was much, much more, right? He was the one, the only, the living Son of God who was man and God at the same time. All right. So his disciples told him, here's who the multitude think you are. Here's some of the things that they suggest maybe you are. And so Jesus now looked at them, and he said to them collectively, so you're 3, 6, 7, 8. Imagine 4 more of you all here as Jesus' followers, his disciples. And Jesus said, okay, but so that's who the people think I am, the multitude. But who do you say that I am? Who do you think that I am? And of course, Peter, who was never one to be shy about his faith, with the exception of one night, Peter was very shy about his faith when 3 times he denied Jesus the night before he was crucified, right? Otherwise, Peter was very vocal in praising, supporting Jesus. So Peter spoke up in verse 20. Peter answering said, the Christ of God. In the study guide, which is CSB, it says, but you, he asked them, who do you say that I am? Peter answered, God's Messiah. So Christ, remember, we say Jesus Christ, right? Well, that's not his name. His name was Jesus, or Emmanuel, which means God with us. Jesus Christ is his name and his title. Christ means Messiah, okay? So Peter says, the Christ of God in King James, and CSB, God's Messiah, which that word means the same thing. So Peter knew who he was, gave the correct answer. The answer that Jesus, I'm sure, had hoped to hear, because that tells him that his followers, his disciples, his core group, understood exactly who he was, that he was not just a prophet, not just a good man, not just a good teacher. He was all those things. He was the Messiah. Okay, that person that had been prophesied coming long down the line. So that was a good answer. Now that he's clear that they understand it, he gives them some instruction in the next couple of verses. Verse 21, and he straightly charged them and commanded them to tell no man that thing, saying, the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected of the elders and chief priests and scribes and be slain and be raised the third day. So he tells them in verse 21, commanded them to tell no man that thing. He confirmed that they knew who he really was. And then immediately he said, he commanded them, don't tell any man that. Don't tell anybody who I really am, which seems kind of odd. Why in the world would he? I would think that he would be, happy. Proud is maybe not the right word. I think of it in terms of a parent when their child confirms to them that they've learned something, that they know something, how proud a parent would be. So I think of it in that context that Jesus was probably happy and proud that Peter answered that way. But so think about, why would he tell them, I'm glad you know that, but don't tell anybody that. Here's what the study guide offers as an explanation for that. Let's see. Well, first of all, before I go to that, one last thing. We've talked about this before. In the previous verses, when he asked who the people say that I am, and they gave him those answers, on page 121, it says the people's misunderstanding of who Jesus was might be traced to their misunderstanding of the messianic role, or the role of the Messiah. Okay? Remember, and it explains it here, the Jews were looking for in their Messiah, who did they think the Messiah was going to be? They were under the thumb, under the oppression of the Roman Empire, right? This was God's chosen people. The Jews is who Jesus is talking to initially, and then, of course, the message spread to the Gentiles. But he's talking to God's chosen people who were oppressed by this Roman government, soldiers, government, and they did not like the Jews. They persecuted the Jews in a horrible, horrific way. So the Jews were looking for this long prophesied Messiah, and what did they expect him to do? They expected him to rescue them. They expected him to come as a conquering king and restore God's people to their chosen place as God's favored nation, and maybe to rule the world. Who knows what exactly they thought God was going to do for them as his chosen people. So this might explain their misunderstanding. It says the Jews were looking for a military leader who would overthrow Rome and create a new Israel. Jesus, though, was not that kind of a Messiah. He had come to set people free from sin, not from a Roman dictatorship. So that's the difference. And that's why a lot of people rejected him, didn't believe it, who he was. So again, that could help explain why they misunderstood who he was when Jesus asked, who do the people say I am? So now back to him commanding them. I'm glad you know who I am, but don't tell that to any man. On page 122 now, it says Jesus wasn't trying to hide his true identity. Jesus certainly, in the later verses, when it talked about being ashamed, Jesus certainly was not ashamed of who he was, and he would never try to hide his identity. However, it says he simply knew that not everyone was ready to hear and respond to the truth. Okay? So perhaps this is why he did not want them to tell people who he was. All right? Now, another possible reason is it says, in addition, any public proclamation of Jesus as the Messiah, if you think about it, Jesus never proclaimed to the people exactly who he was. When he was on trial, people asked him, "Who are you?" And he would say, "Who do you say that I am?" They would ask him, "Are you the Messiah?" He would say, "You say that I am." So there was a point at the end of his trial when he did say, "Yes, I am." But it says any public proclamation of Jesus as Messiah could create tension and potential conflict with the Roman authorities, because the Romans, they didn't care for the Jews at all. And they certainly, if they thought that there was a Messiah, a ruler, a leader coming to perhaps free them from under Roman rule, just like Pharaoh was back in Egypt, he was greatly offended that Moses came and said, "My God tells you through me to let my people go." And Pharaoh said, "No way, bud." Okay, and persecuted them. Remember, he took away their straw, so it made it harder to make bricks. If Jesus was publicly proclaimed as Messiah, perhaps the Romans could create tension and potential conflict with the Roman authorities. Not that Jesus was afraid of that. It says obviously the Romans would play a role in Jesus' crucifixion. But here's the key. Those events would happen according to God's timing and his plan. Okay? Jesus was going to die. He knew he was going to die. He had to die because a blood sacrifice was required for the sins of the world. All right? But it's on God's time. He didn't want the Romans to take things into their own hands too soon. All right. Now, he did say, though, in verse 22, here's one of the reasons why I don't tell the men that, or tell people who I really am, because here's what's got to happen to me. And it says in the study guide 3 times, Jesus explained to his disciples what had to happen to him. And here's another example. The Son of Man, describing himself, must suffer many things and be rejected of the elders and chief priests and scribes. This is talking about within his own religion. He has to be rejected by his own the leaders of his own religion, and be slain. So he knew he was going to die, but then be raised the 3rd day, which obviously came true. So, and he's a prophet, and he knew it was going to happen, and it did happen. Okay. All right. The last part on the study guide about that, verse 22, says that Jesus emphasized that this suffering was necessary. It was not an accident or a tragedy. It was fulfillment of God's plan for salvation. So he knew it. God had prophesied it, and it had to come true. Okay. Y'all, you need to go practice? Okay. Well, thanks. I'll finish up here quickly. All right. Now, here's what he tells them after that. So here's part 2. He says, now, for all of you that believe in me, here's what you must do if you are my follower. And this is important because this applies to us today. And I want to put it in proper context. In verse 23, let's read along with me. It says, if any man will come after me. So if you want to follow me, be my disciple. Here's what you have to do. Let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. Now, does Jesus expect us to deny ourselves as in, don't you expect to be poor, expect to have nothing? Is he saying that literally you've got to carry a cross around with you and follow me? Obviously not. But he goes on to say, whosoever shall save his life shall lose it, but whosoever will lose his life for my sake, the same shall save it. So he's telling them, as his followers, they would need to deny themselves. Their own ambitions and desires would need to be shelved in favor of Jesus' demands. So you can have ambition. You can want to be successful in school and life and everything that you do, right? But first in your life, and this is my prayer, every morning I try to, before I read my Bible, I try to say it to the Lord, let me today put you first in my life. You first, right? My family second, my country, my friends, after that. I mean, there needs to be a hierarchy of what's important to you every day. And if you will remind yourself of that every day, it helps you as you go out in the world. When you start driving, that person cuts you off, or that person's mean to you, or whatever it is, that before you react as a human tends to want to react, if you ask God, Lord, help me today to put you first in every thought and every word and everything that I do. And maybe during the day, refresh that, remind yourself. That's what he's saying. Put me first. Deny yourself, okay? Every day. You take up your cross every day. That's what you need to do. So it's important to try to consider that. All right? Why? Because every person that will save his life shall lose it. So if my life is only about me, I may have a great life. I may be Jeff Bezos and be the richest man on the planet, okay? And there's nothing wrong with being ambitious. No, Bezos is still the richest man on the planet. Musk is second. That's right. Now, if Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, who is a successful but kind of wacky guy, if they're not saved, and they're the richest, and I'll whichever one of them is, and I'll confirm it, but I'm pretty sure that it's okay. All right, but regardless, okay, let me just say that. Okay, Elon Musk is the richest guy. Bezos is second. Now, if they're not saved on the day that they die, what do they have? What did those hundreds of millions of dollars mean to them? Nothing. If they put it in their coffin, when they put them in the ground, does it mean anything? No. And that's the whole point of this, right? For what it?
My money in my casket.
Well, but will you care? But will you care?
I won't, but just say
See,
no.
and that's this is the important thing. Your life, hey guys, listen. Life on this earth, as it said in the Bible, is a vapor. You know. Think about a vapor. Whether it's someone vaping this cloud, or if it's you breathing on a cold day, this vapor that comes out of your mouth. What happens to it? It dissipates. It goes away very quickly, right? This life, even if you live 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 years, it's that fast, right? And when it's over, it says in verse 25, it's perfectly said, for what is a man advantage? What does a man gain if he gains the whole world? He's a billionaire, multi-billions of dollars, and lose himself or be cast away. It's worth nothing. Okay? Now, in verse 26, here's the ashamed part. And I want to make sure we hit this before you guys have to go. For whosoever shall be ashamed of me and of my word. So back to that ashamed thing. Have you ever, has everyone been ashamed at some point in their life? Ashamed of something, embarrassed or whatever? Of course, everyone has. Now, that's not what this is saying. For everyone who is ashamed of me, and what this is for everyone who rejects him. That's what ashamed means. Like if someone says, do you know Jesus? And you do, and you say, no, I don't. You've rejected him. You're acting ashamed of him. And that's not just with your words, but as I talked about earlier, with your actions. Trying to fit in. Be very careful about that. Everybody wants to have their friends, their group, but do not let that take you down a path of doing things that, Jesus himself, if he was standing there with you, wouldn't approve of, right? So be careful with that. For whosoever shall be ashamed of me and of my words, and this is what convicted me years later in my life, of looking back, I'd always claimed I'm a Christian, right? That when I look back, how many times did I do things that were not Christ-like? Because I didn't want somebody to go, oh, you don't want to go with us and do this? What's wrong with you? Wrong answer. Okay? Be stronger than I was. She's always been very firm in her conviction and her belief. She just said, no, I'm not going to do things like that, whatever. That's the model of how people should be. Okay? She slipped, she has her moments, but what I'm saying is my observation, my witness of her is that she was very strong in her conviction. Okay, there are things that she just would not do. Okay, and think about things like, again, drinking, language, how you act, the things that you do. All right. So it says, "Whosoever shall be ashamed of me and of my words, of him shall the Son of Man be ashamed." So if you're going to deny me, I'm going to be in heaven one day, and I hope to see all of you there. But if you deny me, I'm going to deny you. All right. That's the bottom line. So let me show you one thing.
Elon Musk became the richest man at 185 billion.
Just as an example. What? Say it again.
Elon Musk became the richest man at 100. That's over 50 billion more than Jeff Bezos.
What does that say? Who is Jesus to you? Right? I may see if I can put together a little sign-up sheet and see who might want one of those. Mandy got that sticker and put it on her car, and I loved it. So I think they make different colors. All right. Thanks for your attention. Go practice and sing well. And do not be ashamed.